Okay, this week we're looking at edutainment and gamification, which is a form of edutainment. Um, Techopedia defines edutainment as technologies and software products that combine education with entertainment in some way. Many of these products and technologies seek to make education more attractive to young people and students. In other words, in both edutainment and gamification, unlike all the rest of the weeks we're going to be looking at, the focus here is not so much on the games, it's the purpose is the education. And the gaming elements are being brought in as to serve education. So edutainment is a word that's often used in a very negative way. People say, well, that's not really gaming, that's just edutainment. And they say it because our schools are full of stuff that is really bad edutainment. I found this one online. It is probably the perfect example. I don't really know anything about the Time for Learning program. I have to say that right up. But this little blurb selling it is the perfect example of why edutainment is so often considered very negatively. They say, with Time for Learning, math lessons are taught by engaging characters in colorful, fun activities. Okay, so you've got the cartoon characters, you've got all kinds of color, you've got what's supposed to be fun activities, but if you look over at this activity, it's just like a worksheet, right? They're just worksheets online with cartoons and dancing monkeys and things like that. I doubt if those third graders are really excited about learning about parts of whole from Frank and his employees at Frank's Fraction Pizzeria. Here's another great example of that. Reading Street is a program that a whole lot of schools have invested enormous amounts of money in, but basically it's just reading online, a lot of reading worksheets online with colors and giraffes and lions, 100% Common Core. Doesn't that just make you want to play it? Or one from my youth, Mario Teaches Typing. Mario was somehow supposed to make it fun to learn how to type, but it was basically just a typing program. Okay? But edutainment does not have to be that way. And we all have very fond memories of certain games that were designed for education. This one, of course, Oregon Trail, but they were in fact entertaining. Here's another, probably the classic, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Again, designed by a bunch of people who had in mind geographic education, not game design. It wasn't just, oh, we want to make a game and we happen to pick geography. No, they wanted to teach geography, but they did it so well. And edutainment does not have to be games. Okay, again, a lot of us remember Schoolhouse Rock and Conjunction Junction. You remember that? Or Sesame Street, classic, wonderfully done edutainment, the longest running children's television program in the world. It has beat out all the cartoons and the Superman and the Hercules and everything because it continues to appeal to children. It doesn't have to be things just for young children. Bill Nye the Science Guy is edutainment. And for adults, TED Talks could definitely be considered edutainment. So edutainment doesn't have to be lousy, but it so often is that people are concerned about it. People often say, well, when you put the education in, you took the fun out. It doesn't have to be that way, but it can be. So here's some of the things that we see as issues with edutainment, uses of edutainment, especially in the schools. And the first one is it actually interesting and fun? Kids are kind of hard to fool. You know, the first time you put them on the computer game, the computer program that's really just worksheets with monkeys on a computer, yeah, they're going to be interested. But you know, when you put them on it for the fifth week, they're bored to death because it isn't actually interesting and fun. Another good question is the content actually integrated into the fun? Whether it's a game or a story narrative or a show like Bill Nye the Science Guy, is it integral to it, or is it an obvious add-on? I remember one of the very early Apple edutainment games that was supposed to help kids memorize their multiplication tables. And what happened is you answered a multiplication problem correctly and you got to shoot an asteroid. It was based on the old asteroids game. Okay. Well, obviously shooting the asteroid had nothing to do with the math you were doing. It wasn't like you calculated your shot using the math, which would have been useful. It was just an add-on. Oh, we're going to make you do math flashcards, and here you get to shoot asteroids. That's usually lousy edutainment. And a real concern cognitive scientists have is the fun just distracting kids from what we really hope they'll learn? Are they going to remember the cartoons and the colors and the shooting the asteroids, or are they going to remember their multiplication tables? And again, if it's not very well integrated, that could very easily happen. Whereas in a game like Oregon Trail, which is an edutainment game, it was built for educating, but you have to learn the stuff to play through the game. So you do remember the things, everybody remembers the dysentery, okay, but you do remember the hazards and the places you traveled and the way you had to get supplies and all those things, because it was an integral part of the game. And that's one of the important things to watch out for in edutainment. Okay, so gamification is the latest and greatest version of edutainment, and I just want to reiterate the definition of gamification. It's the use of game design, especially video game design, elements within non-game contexts. Now let's look at gamification and how it differs from actual games. So here's gamification. Very often you'll see points, badges, levels, leaderboards, challenges, just like you did in Anderson's TED Talk, which is a great example of a typically gamified classroom. And his was one of the first. But looking a little deeper, these are the things we think of when we gamify, but looking a little deeper, it's really important that you have feedback, good feedback, quick feedback, clear goals and rules. A compelling narrative is often part of gamification. Not always, but some kind of story or quest. And challenging but achievable tasks. Okay, so there's gamification. Now, interestingly, games themselves that we play don't always have all of these things. For example, the little girl we looked at playing hopscotch. Okay, there are, I guess, sort of points in hopscotch, but there certainly aren't any badges or levels. Kind of levels. You move up from 1 to 2 to 3. Okay. There's no narrative. Hopscotch is a very basic, kind of stripped to the bone kind of a game. Think of a very early video game, Pac-Man. You had some of these other things. You certainly had points. You had leaderboards. You could have the high score on that machine only for Pac-Man. There's not really a narrative, though, or anything, is there? We move up to a game very popular today, Stardew Valley. And interestingly, there is a narrative. There are things you can kind of win. There is kind of a competition thing. But most people play it more for the fun of creation. And then there are games that have none of these things. Little kids playing Ring Around a Rosie. You don't have any of these things going on. And yet it's still a game. So gamification, when we talk gamification, we're looking at some very specific things that we've kind of extracted from games, especially video games, and are applying, in our case, into learning situations. Although one of the optional things you can look at this week, we'll look at gamification at work, which is a major trend. Okay. Oh, before we go, I want to point out the intersection of these two Venn diagrams. There isn't a really good line between gamification and using games for learning. There's places that they overlap. And after this screencast, when you listen to UK Chow's talk about gamification, I think you're going to see a lot more overlap between gamification and true games and play than you did in Anderson's. Okay, so you remember our model of expectancy by value motivation for learning? I'm going to overlay this model and see how gamification, how this model can teach us the right and wrong way to gamify things, okay? Because gamification is not like a magic bullet. It's not suddenly that if you put badges and points and leaderboards up, everybody's going to be motivated. I can guarantee you. But there are good ways to gamify things. And they have to do with really understanding the underlying motivations that you're trying to reach. So, over on the expectancy side here, we know that we're more motivated to learn in areas where we feel competent, and we're more motivated to learn when we believe that our abilities are growing. They're not fixed, but they can gain. They are growing. So effective gamified learning, typically, just like a video game, starts out with easy tasks and builds difficulties as students succeed, thereby creating a sense of self-efficacy and success and a growth mindset. We know that we're more motivated to learn when we feel some control over what and how and when and how quickly we have to learn. And again, effective gamified learning, just like an effective good video game, offers students choices about different paths to learning and a somewhat flexible time schedule. One of the things that really can be done wrong in gamifying learning is to set everybody on the same time schedule. We know that we're more motivated to learn when we know that help is available if we run into problems, and effective gamified learning includes built-in scaffolds, and actually Anderson talked about the fact that that's something he was missing, was scaffolds for the kids who have trouble reading, and also encourages collaboration and opportunities to seek help from peers and the teacher. You're not just left on your own. One of the really bad things that I'm seeing as a trend in gamification right now is to sit kids on computers and say, okay, work your way through the levels, gain your points, here's your leaderboard, all by yourself. That's not very good learning, typically. Okay. We know that we're more motivated to learn when we think we're going to have enough time. And effective gamified learning gives students, learners, enough time to try and fail and try again and fail again and try again, because that's part of gamification, but also time to explore side quests and side paths and alternatives, different ways to do things. Exploration is important, and you have to leave the time for that. Okay, looking over on the value side. We know we're more motivated to learn when things are situationally interesting or they connect to personal interests. And effective gamified learning uses situational interest hugely, graphics and story and color and novelty, and also, if possible, draws on students' personal interests, their sports, animals, whatever it is they're interested in. We know that we're more motivated to learn when learning helps us accomplish other goals that we value. Gamified learning rewards students, but they reward them with recognition. Sorry about that extra I there. Badges and leaderboards, we know about that. But you also reward students with further challenges and greater choice. Rewards are far more effective when they're connected to what people are learning. So, for example, Accelerated Reader, which a number of you who teach are familiar with, is a gamified approach to getting kids to read. It's, in my mind, not a particularly good one, but it can be tweaked a little to be made better, so that the rewards in Accelerated Learner should be things like getting to take out an extra library book if you want to, or getting to keep a book longer, or getting to help pick out the new books for the library. One really smart librarian I knew made the big reward for the kids who got over 100 points every semester a library lock-in where they slept over in the library in their PJs, and they watched movies related to books, and they read books, and they ate, and they drank, and they read more books, and they had a great time. Okay? But all of those rewards are related to reading. If you give a kid a pizza if they read a book, what you're telling a kid is that the fun thing is the pizza, and the book is the thing you have to do to get it, which is not the message you had in mind. And that's not very motivating for lifelong reading. So you have to be careful what you reward people with. You have to show them the true value of the thing that you're trying to get them to learn. It should be connected. Okay, we know that we're more motivated to learn when our self-image is enhanced rather than threatened or contradicted. So effective gamified learning celebrates personal milestones, not just, the top 5 on the leaderboard, but every time, just like, again, in a video game, you level up. It encourages constant improvement, and it often includes creation of an avatar or a game identity. And this is a really interesting thing about gamification and self-image. Most of us would like to be something a little cooler and different and bigger and better than what we are. And that's one of the real draws of video games, and can be a draw in gamified learning. We know that we're more motivated to learn when learning facilitates or enhances our relationships with people we care about. So effective gamified learning encourages collaboration and cooperation, and often includes group rewards that all members contribute to. And this is a really important thing. If all the payoffs go to the top on the leaderboard, that's great for those top kids, but the kids you really were worried about motivating were the bottom kids, weren't they? Okay, but if you set it up so that every time that the class together achieves 20 level ups, or 27, or however many kids you have in your class, then the class gets a reward, like an extra, extra free time on Friday or something. Then every time every kid levels up, even if they're leveling from 1 to 2, and other kids are at 9 and 10, they're still contributing to that reward. Those kinds of group rewards, not the ones that say everybody has to reach a certain place, because then the kid who's slow everybody hates. But the rewards where everybody contributes. If you add up all the points earned that week, if the whole class gets over 300 points, or whatever number you want to pick, they get an extra hour of free time on Friday or something. Those are the kind of rewards that encourage people to work together and help each other. And finally, we know we're less motivated when the cost of trying to learn is high and the risk is high. So effective gamified learning includes meaningful learning, which makes the benefits high, but makes failure a part of progress, just again like they are in a good video game, which reduces the risk and raises the benefits. Okay, so a few cautions about gamification. Situational interest, mainly novelty, is a very strong motivator early on in gamification when you first gamify a classroom. But that novelty value diminishes rapidly with familiarity. So you have to make sure that you've built in enough meaningful things, relationship things, real learning goals that they see utility value to, personal interest in, those things, so that your interest is not just depending on, oh, this is something new and cool and fun, because that's not going to last. When rewards are overemphasized in gamification, it can push learners toward performance or ego goals rather than mastery learning goals. In other words, if the only thing that matters is getting more points, kids are focusing on more on getting the points than they are on learning the stuff. And if you don't think this can happen, think about grades. That's exactly, grades are, in a way, a form of gamification. And there are kids who focus only on keeping that 4.0 and not about learning anything. In fact, they avoid taking on learning challenges because it might threaten their position in the honor roll, which is just sort of another form of leaderboard, isn't it? So you have to watch out for that. You have to balance it. Competition motivates a lot of kids, but keep in mind that competition is a lot more motivating for the winners and the people who think they have a chance to win than it is for the losers. And in every class, there are kids who are never going to make it to the top of that leaderboard. So again, that can't be the only important thing. And the last caution is more of a personal thing for the teacher. Like behaviorism, on which gamification and video games are partially based, gamification can be used to manipulate people for the benefit of the gamifier rather than for their own best good. In other words, I can use gamification to keep kids quiet and controllable instead of using it to really help them to learn and learn deeply. And that's all about my ethics as the gamifier. And if you're interested in the connection between behaviorism and video games and gamification, there are a couple of articles in the optionals that look at the behaviorist roots of video games. They're very eye-opening. If you're in psychology or at all interested in video games, they're definitely worth a look. But like I said, just as behaviorism can be seriously misused, so can gamification. It can serve the purpose of the institution or the teacher rather than the true good of the kids. And it's all about the person who does the design and their ethics. You have to keep in mind. Just wanted to mention.